Hello, today we're going to talk about the gentleman featured here in the portrait, Alexander von Humboldt, who lived 90 years roughly from 1769 to 1859. He was a polymath, very learned in multiple topics, both scientific and non scientific. A polyglot, for those of you who don't know, means that he was fluent in five or six different languages. He was Prussian, in other words, German born, and spoke and wrote German, but his favorite writing was in French. A well known and at the time world renowned scientist, groundbreaking findings and discoveries, and an explorer that dovetailed with his scientific discoveries of getting out into the field and seeing with his own two eyes and his instruments with measurements, science unfolding before him and conclusions that he drew. With regard to the plant world, he's famous for identifying plant diversity and stratification based upon geographic location, altitude, and latitude, and so forth, and measuring the same with advanced instruments for his time, which would have been in the early 19th century. He is a key founder of what became known as ecology, which is the interaction with living organisms in the environment. And he was also an environmentalist for his time and very concerned about conservation and the impact of human activity on the environment. He was a literal trailblazer, stage setter for people like Henry David Thoreau, who read his works and was influenced by them, and his own writings reflected that. And Charles Darwin, among many other scientists who eclipsed von Humboldt later on. But I don't think from a scientific standpoint, but just from a popularity standpoint, and sort of overshadowed him, even though he was a disciple of von Humboldt's. And Humboldt, in fact, died about 6 months before Darwin published his Origin of Species in 1859. So, really, just an incredible guy. And in fact, there's a great biography on Amazon of von Humboldt titled, of all things, The Invention of Nature, Alexander von Humboldt's New World, which captures quite a magnificent array of subject matter to be credited with inventing nature, which isn't literally true, but it shows you the magnitude of his discoveries. So go to the next slide here. Um, One of the things he did that became famous was he wanted to take an expedition into Central and South America to go out and conduct his scientific studies on the terrain, the topography, the geography, the zoology, plant life, etc. And he had to go to Charles IV of Spain for approval because in this slide you'll see the colonies that were under Spanish control in the 1799 time frame. And he went and got that approval, and he proceeded to visit these areas. We'll talk specifically about Ecuador, but he went on to collect an enormous amount of data on the plant and animal world and local cultures and other topics. He traveled thousands of miles, collected approximately 60,000 plant specimens, identified from that about 2,000 new species of plants, and took extensive notes on topics ranging from zoology, geology, and meteorology. Coincidentally, as his trip was ending, Lewis and Clark embarked on their core discovery at the behest of President Thomas Jefferson, and their travels out west to discover water passage that would cover from west to east. They weren't successful in that, but they did discover, in comparison to Humboldt's 2,000 new species, they discovered about 130 new plant species, was quite groundbreaking in and of itself out in the American West. But their travels were, although somewhat contemporaneous, they were independent and unrelated. But I would note that Humboldt did visit with Thomas Jefferson on a few occasions, and Jefferson noticed or noted that Humboldt was perhaps the most interesting man that Thomas Jefferson had ever met in his long esteemed life. The next slide, we see the Mount Chimborazo in Ecuador, which was largely scaled by Humboldt when he visited there. He was among the first Europeans to go there, and he climbed without oxygen, um, 20,000 feet, just short of the summit, about 1,000 feet short, because he was getting very lightheaded. But 20,000 feet was quite a monumental exercise without oxygen, and that the fact alone that he climbed it stood for nearly 30 years. It was considered to be the highest mountain in the world. Mount Everest had yet to be discovered as being the highest mountain in the world. And as part of the work here, if you were to enlarge this diagram of Mount Chimborazo, this was done by von Humboldt, and he details elaborately the different findings that he had at various altitudes with flora and fauna, and also just the geographic map he makes of the mountain. And it culminates in his 1807 publication of the essay on the geography of plants, relating to the altitudinal stratification of plants, which he later correlated with latitudinal changes given atmospheric temperature, radiation, humidity types of factors that he studied on a quantitative basis. But there was a correlation from the altitude with the latitude and finding similar plants as he went on with these discoveries. Again, a groundbreaking effort. And also the diagram itself was a new phenomenon in a scientific explanation of travel findings. The central concept of the book was that plants must not only be considered in terms of their taxonomic characterizations and relations, but also grouped in relation to where these plants existed geographically and how they interacted with the environment, again, which led to become the field of ecology. And he called these different groups of plants divisions of physiognomies, of which he identified 15 general categories, dominated by different plants such as palms, firs, cacti, grasses, mosses, and so on. And the effect of this approach was to emphasize the visual patterns in vegetation as you ascended in the altitude, leading to not only a scientific discovery but also an aesthetic approach and visual approach to what you see out in the field as a scientist or a layperson, and the discoveries that you can make visually. And so this diagram that he prepared correlated, and it is in French, by the way, different plant species with the elevation, temperature, and humidity, among other factors. The essay was foundational in ecology and biogeography due to the revolutionary concept of how plants were interconnected with climate and geography, and introduced key concepts in science that included altitudinal zonation, which is, again, the vertical arrangement of plants based upon temperature, humidity, radiation, and soil conditions. For example, we all have heard of tree lines, where you go up to a high enough altitude, there won't be any more trees. They call it the tree line. And his extensive use of quantitative data that he amassed and synthesized, as well as coupled with his visualization in science. This led to scientist Ernst Haeckel's book, Morphology of Organisms, which was highly influenced by von Humboldt's discoveries, where he observed the complex interrelationships of plants and animals with the environment, leading to the formal term ecology. And Haeckel described ecology as the, quote, science of the relationships of an organism with its environment, close quote, building off of Humboldt's groundbreaking research and exploration. His impact, again, it is on other scientists that followed him. It is said that Darwin never would have sailed on the HMS Beagle to the Galapagos and other locations, nor written his seminal Origin of Species about the evolution of animals without being heavily influenced by von Humboldt, as well as other people like John Muir, who's considered to be the founder of U.S. national parks, and influenced Teddy Roosevelt in conservation of tens of millions of acres, that he would have never ended up in California but for von Humboldt's personal narrative of his adventures and scientific explorations in South America. So he had a immense and profound impact on other today more well-known scientists that again overshadow his tremendous achievements. And he drew these sketches. These are some examples in this last slide of the sketches that he drew, very vivid sketches, and many artists have picked up on his landscapes and so forth from an artistic perspective. But when he returned to Europe following his trip to South and Central America, he not only published a 16-volume treatise on botany, again detailing about 6,000 different plants and 2,000 of which were new species in the plant world. He also tried to synthesize his broader global discoveries and views in science across a whole range of topics in a multi-volume book called The Cosmos, which he attempted to describe the entire universe as a single interconnected entity that was at the time immensely popular, found in most personal libraries and widely read across the world. So in conclusion, Humboldt, with his incredible and virtually unlimited sense of curiosity, his voracious reading from a very young age, life learning, and extensive travel to remote areas of the world, has been described as a man who was the last man who knew everything. Thank you very much, and I hope you found this interesting.